You're listening to the Mythcreant Podcast with your hosts, Oren Ashkenazi and Chris Winkle.
There was a castle by a waterfall with a pink and purple wall and a princess living there. She had no parents and was all alone. She got by on her own and she liked it pretty well. 'Cause she never wore socks. She had a pet snake. She bought her a guitar and she ate a whole cake. And there wasn't anybody there to tell her what to do, so she did what she wanted to. Everybody knew the story of the princess who saved herself.
And welcome everyone to another episode of the Mythcreant Podcast. I'm Oren.
And I'm Chris.
Quick, we gotta get through this topic before our half-hour time limit runs out. It's a challenge, but hour-long episodes make some topics kind of untenable anyway, so we really have no choice.
Yeah, we actually had somebody recently request that we do hour-long podcasts like we used to. I think the assumption there is that if our podcast keeps going and doesn't have a time limit, that we will continue to say insightful things, when the reality is that we'll probably just start talking about the weather after the half an hour mark.
There are just a lot of topics that there's not enough to say on them to fill an hour.
We had such a limited pool of topics when we were talking for an hour. And then when we moved to a half an hour, it opened up so many that we could talk to for, a shorter period of time. So not eager.
We do sometimes get topics that are too big for half an hour, but we split them up then. We focus on a smaller part of them, which I guess actually decreases urgency, and that's bad, because we're talking about urgency in fiction today.
Yeah, I mean, how are our podcast episodes going to be exciting if we have all the time in the world?
Yeah, we could just talk forever, which would be boring. You wouldn't want that, trust me.
Well, don't tell our listeners that. I'm pretty sure some of them do think they want that.
They think that, then they would get it, and they would realize the curse, the monkey's paw that they have called upon themselves. So what is urgency in fiction, Chris?
I would say it's a feeling of time pressure. I've heard it referred to by others many times as a ticking clock. And this is specifically for creating tension, right, in the story. I suppose urgency might have some other uses for things besides tension occasionally, but almost always we're talking about tension. So we've got a problem with stakes, and the protagonist has a limited amount of time to solve the problem, or else all is lost.
There are sort of the three basic elements for creating tension in most circumstances. Stakes, something needs to matter. Difficulty, it needs to be hard to solve the problem. And then urgency, it needs to be done in an amount of time. Because if you can just take forever, then you'll figure it out eventually.
I mean, I've often grouped together urgency and uncertainty, which is basically our difficulty factor, where it has to feel like the problem might not actually be solved because it's difficult to solve, etc. And what happens is if we have 100 years to figure out this problem, even if it seems impossible to solve, it just feels like, God, it's century, we'll think of something if there's no time limit. But at the end of the day, if you never have the uncertainty requirement met without urgency, it's, for all intents and purposes, its own requirement.
I think of it as the difference between what are your chances on the die roll you're about to make versus how many die rolls can you make, is the way I think of it, because I'm a weird nerd.
That's a good way of looking at it, because that does happen in stories where you realize that the character might try to solve a problem and then fail, and then they just can keep trying again and again. And that is a big problem. It means there is no urgency if we can just trial and error our way out of this problem. I also think, again, for uncertainty purposes, it's nice if you have a character fail to solve the problem. If the time is really precious, having it just be like, okay, well, not only did we fail to solve the problem, but we wasted all this time. Usually you also want some additional reason why, okay, now it's going to be harder because I failed to solve the problem and broke my equipment or something like that. But urgency by itself can potentially, like every time loop episode has some way of figuring this out.
So that means that more urgency, more better, right? We just always have the highest urgency. Every problem should need to be solved in the next 2 seconds.
Sure, that's why every story takes only 2 seconds. Stories are so short these days because it's just better that way.
We solved it. There we go.
No, I mean, I do think it's worth asking, okay, how tight should the timeline be? And the answer, of course, is it depends. Although it depends on something very specific, right? It depends on what are you trying to do in that time. And a goal, again, with anything about uncertainty with solving problems is always to make it feel like it's a bit of an uphill battle without making it impossible. So if you have to, evacuate the planet, 1 year could be a very, very tight timeline for that and feel very urgent, even though you have an entire year. Whereas giving somebody a year to clean their bedroom is not not a tight timeline.
Yeah, the question is going to be one of scale. You're going to need more time to deal with a problem of moving a bunch of people. That's not something that you can do shortly. So if you say, well, we have to move 500 people in the next 5 minutes, it's like, well, that is impossible. So tension is effectively zero now because the chances of success are also zero. Whereas if a guy's coming to kill you, and you give them a year, well, that's not very tense, even though those are very high stakes. It's not a high scale problem. It's very personal. A year is probably way too much time.
And also we're thinking about you as a storyteller. There's a problem. Do you have a way for the protagonist to solve it in the deadline you set, which can be really tricky sometimes because, again, for it to be tense, we want the reader to perceive that this is going to be an uphill battle, shall we say, to solve the problem in this time. But then you as a storyteller also need enough time for excitement and stuff to happen. And sometimes what happens is you get weird time dilation problems. And this particularly happens in action scenes. So for instance, you've got your protagonist is out in the woods, say, and you've got an enemy that is closing in. Now you get to choose, where does that enemy appear? Do they appear right in the tree above? Do you see them over the next hill? And wherever you place the enemy, there's going to be a certain amount of suggested time until they reach your protagonist. And then your protagonist might need to do something like get up and run. They might need to help somebody else escape. Maybe they need to solve a puzzle. I don't know. There could be all sorts of things that you have here. Get their weapon, which is stuck in their sheath. In that timeline, what I see sometimes in various situations is you got to make this exciting. Because we want the sequence to be exciting, we make the enemy really close. Or we could have a situation that's similar with cleaning the bedroom. Oh no, parents are about to come home. They're going to ground me. I have to clean my bedroom in just 5 minutes. But it's really hard to actually depict the protagonist doing what they need to do in that time. And then somehow, our enemy that was supposed to be right up in the treetops just takes a really long time to fall. Well, the protagonist does half a dozen things, but, the enemy jumps from the tree and the protagonist sets up an entire trap in that time somehow. I thought of this because we've been watching Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, they do that a lot.
They make a joke out of the incredibly implausible traps. The more recent Scooby-Doo show.
Yeah, although even the outline that I'm working on, you noted that I had a sequence where my protagonist is running away from a monster, and it really seems like the monster probably should have just caught her already, and it hasn't? What's going on with that? Oren, did you say that the monster was really close to create urgency, but then not want to deal with that because you didn't want your protagonist to get eaten? No comment.
But also sometimes it's just you want to create a conflict and the conflict shouldn't be over immediately. So you need time for the protagonist to dodge around things and make moves. But for that to happen, the enemy has to be farther away to allow more time.
Yeah, thinking about it in terms of moves helps a lot because, again, different conflicts are going to happen at different speeds. Cleaning your room, if the room is dirty enough for that to be an issue, you're probably not going to be able to take care of it in 2 minutes. That's just unlikely. It just doesn't make sense. Moves in terms of cleaning your room take 10 minutes each, at least, because you've got to sweep or put things away or whatever. And if it's serious, that's going to take a little bit. Whereas in a fights move very quickly. In that situation, you can very easily have it be, we have a few minutes, unless you need them to do something really elaborate, like set up a trap, which that's just not going to work. You're going to need to plan the story differently if you want that.
Yeah. I mean, you could have your protagonist make a move that gives them a little more time. We're going to distract the parents somehow. Or let's say we're being chased down. We're going to try to throw something that creates a sound somewhere else and delays the attacker for a couple moments or something like that. You could do that. But at some point in time, you kind of have to look at what's realistic in addition to what is tense.
Right, and usually if you were going to make cleaning the room into a fictional conflict, you would probably have the turning point be something other than the physical cleaning of the room, just because that's not, for most characters, going to be a particularly difficult endeavor. Most characters are going to be capable of doing that, but at the same time, it's very unlikely most characters could rush it to be done in a couple minutes, so you would usually have the turning point be something like, can I convince my parents to stay out for another hour, or Can I have the willpower to actually clean my room and not watch TV all day? Something like that is usually what I think you would go for in that situation.
I think the characters should just stuff a bunch of garbage up their shirt and then have to like stay still without moving so that the parent doesn't see.
Yeah, if you get into more like creative solutions, if it's a magic story, your character could cast a quick illusion to make it look like the room is clean and then struggle to maintain it without any telltale shimmer as the parent inspects to see if the room's actually clean.
So yeah, there's lots of things you can do there. But in any case, how far away the timeline is, again, the whole idea is that you need time pressure and it's just proportional. If it's something that's a year away, of course you want your protagonist to be able to sleep and have meals. But if it's something that's an hour away, they're not going to take a meal break. They're not going to take a nap. And having your character also act as though it's urgent. Because, again, remember that people follow the lead of your protagonist by default, unless you do something to suggest otherwise. They assume the protagonist was right, and that's just because in 99% of the time in stories, that is in fact true. And so therefore, that is naturally what they are used to. Generally, your protagonist also has to act like it's urgent, which leads me to talking about urgency fading, which is a big issue that when we're talking about urgency as a requirement for tension, it's worth thinking like, okay, when do I actually have to do something to make the situation more urgent and when will it inherently feel urgent? And in a lot of cases, what we see is that problems initially have a feeling of urgency, but it quickly dies as story time passes. And how this works is because just nothing bad happens. So if you were driving your car and you realize your gas tank has been leaking, and then you realize this leak has been happening for the last week and you've been driving your car around, that must be a very slow leak because it's been going on for quite a while and you haven't noticed any bad effects. And so that also suggests to you that, oh, well, you can finish your errand and drive it to the mechanic without worrying about running empty on your gas tank. It's just like that with all sorts of problems and stories. A character going missing is a huge one. Anytime a character is maybe been kidnapped or has just simply disappeared, it feels urgent initially, very urgent, because there's a big risk that they are in mortal danger. They might be in a really dangerous situation. What if they fell down the well or something like that? They might be injured. Or if they were kidnapped, maybe the kidnapper will kill them in the first few hours.
I mean, I was watching a show the other day, and the first 3 episodes, at least, are about trying to find this missing kid, and it's like, well, after the second episode, I'm just starting to think he's either fine or dead. If he was in immediate danger, then that has already had time to pass, and if he wasn't, then doesn't feel particularly urgent. I'm sure we'll get to it eventually. And you can counteract that. An interesting example is Will Byers in Stranger Things Season 1, by which I mean the only season. They never made any more, thankfully. But he goes missing in the first episode, and it's like, oh, wow, what happened? That's scary. But, you know, as time passes, you would normally start to think, well, either he's dead or he's fine. But they keep that alive by having him be able to communicate and drop hints that something's still happening. Not only that he is alive, but he is still in danger. And that keeps the tension up and reestablishes urgency because you get some actual info about what's happening. This is a thing that I've seen some authors struggle with. Is it is true that keeping a threat mysterious often increases tension, but it can't be 100% mysterious. You need to give something, otherwise readers have no reason to worry at all.
If you have a mysterious threat, you still need some sign that it could cause harm after a while. In stories, one we've talked about before is the beginning of Name of the Wind. We have these spider demons that are threatening the town in the beginning prologue part. And it seems like a really bad problem, but then Kavoth just hangs out cleaning bottles at his inn for a while. And it starts to feel like, okay, maybe this isn't a big deal because nothing bad has happened yet. That's why if you have a lot happening and a lot of activity, especially if you have an unfolding conflict, it already feels immediate. So if you're showing your hero and villain dueling with blades, you don't have to do anything special to create urgency because we can see things change, and every time the villain lunges for the hero, we know that they are in immediate danger. But if you have any like long running problem, especially, a lot of times you do have to do something special in order to make sure that there is tension in that situation.
And it's interesting because we're talking about how to establish urgency. The obvious solution is to use an actual clock. You have an actual timer that is counting down, and that might be a kitchen timer or a calendar or whatever. But often you're not going to have something that precise, so you have to like give a rough idea, and that is where the danger of, well, too much time has elapsed, now it feels boring. If you say the castle's going to be attacked soon, what does soon mean? Does it mean within a scene? Within a chapter? If it goes more than that, I don't really believe you that it's going to be attacked soon anymore.
Yeah, we get back into that same issue of urgency dying the more time passes. So you could have a thing where it's like, oh, at any time the enemy will attack. And that will work. But again, the more time passes, the more that starts to fade, unless you do something to have, again, your mysterious enemies start making some moves and start harming people. If you have a serial killer out there, for instance, who is just like in the regular habit of killing people, and you can make that work. Because you know another person, the longer you wait, the more people are going to die. Or similarly, you can show like a trend heading in a bad direction, like the fire is consuming more and more of the city. And so we need to stop it before it gets more. The main thing with when you're observing repeated bad things happening or a problem getting worse is to just make milestones and the difference feel concrete. Because if you like emotionally distance yourself, let's say like you've got a plague in the city. And every day you wait, more people are technically dying, but they're dying somewhere else, right? And all the main characters are fine, right? After a while, it just may feel like it doesn't matter because you're not putting the story behind making it matter. You kind of have to have the plague come closer to where the characters readers like are. Have somebody the readers actually know come down with the plague. You know, maybe it's spreading to more people they care about more, and have concrete milestones so that they still feel like, okay, it matters. These aren't just like nameless people in the background. You want it to matter. And that also is important if you have any ongoing problems, like a character being imprisoned, for instance, is another one where like that will feel less urgent as the character hangs out in prison. Even if they're miserable, we need to make it emotionally impactful that they're miserable.
Right. We've talked in other places about how tension is usually the result of the status quo going to change for the negative. Once a new negative status quo takes over and it seems to be going like it's just going to continue, even if it sucks, that's not going to be super tense because it's just the same.
In those cases, again, it's really helpful to just, let's add some stakes with a deadline. They're easy to add together, which is nice. So like we have our prisoner and, okay, if I don't escape from this prison before such and such date, they're all gonna brand us with a branding iron and then everybody will know that I'm a slave and I'll never get free again. Or something. We have a specific situation that is like a point of no return that adds a new deadline to the situation. Adding new stakes and a new timeline can be really helpful in those situations where after a while, okay, this feels like the new status quo. Or we have nameless people dying and it's not emotionally hitting home anymore. That kind of thing.
And using different levels of urgency is also how you build plots that are either immediate and need to be dealt with right now versus plots that are building and will become a bigger deal later. This is how you create a story where we have to escape Tatooine right now because there's stormtroopers and they're closing in, they're going to get us. But we know that the Death Star is out there and we're going to have to deal with it eventually. You want the urgency to be balanced correctly. You don't want it to be like, well, we got to escape Tatooine, but the Death Star's attacking us right now. So that kind of makes escaping Tatooine kind of a moot point.
This is just a great thing for any time you have like your first story in a series, for instance, but it also applies to like a child arc in a bigger story. Your child arc versus your through line, book one versus your series arc. Is you attach the biggest stakes to the longer overarching story, and then the immediate problem that you're dealing with right now can have lower stakes but higher urgency, and that will make it more exciting right now while still making that bigger story really important. So yeah, the Death Star is like the more higher stakes problem because it can destroy whole planets, but like right now we urgently need to escape from Tatooine.
And I mean, of course, you could need to escape because the Death Star is going to blow up Tatooine, but I was imagining the Death Star is going to destroy the Rebel base or something. That's an urgent problem, but it's not something we're dealing with right now.
Right. We want to make it less urgent, and then whatever the current arc is, more urgent. And then the nice thing is that when it's time to like tackle the big series through line, book through line, whatever, you can usually increase the urgency. You can add a new deadline that wasn't there before in order to bring that plot line to the forefront.
Yeah. One thing that I found interesting is that some authors just take for granted that nothing is going to change in a long period of time, and I don't know, I just don't believe them. I was so confused by the book Three Body Problem, where at the end of it, aliens are on their way, and I thought they were going to be here in 40 years, because it said they're traveling at 1/10 the speed of light from 4 light years away. And I was like, that's actually pretty tense, right? In 40 years, we're supposed to deal with an alien invasion? That sounds rough. But then they said, no, 400 years, because apparently they're only going at 1/10 of C for a very short part of the trip. Which is like, okay, well, I'm reasonably confident that in 400 years we'll have a solution. Like, I don't know, apparently the author thought I wasn't supposed to think that.
Yeah, let's just pass some funding bills on space defense, I guess.
Or who knows, maybe they'll get here and we'll all be dead, right? Like, that's another possibility. Barring any other explanation, technology tends to improve pretty quickly. Now, again, I'm not guaranteeing that would continue, but I have no reason to think it wouldn't in this particular case. And the book certainly hasn't done any work to make it look like 400 years isn't going to be a long enough time.
Yeah, no.
So yeah, it was just very strange.
That's pretty impractically long. I guess if you have a really long-lived or immortal protagonist, it's not impossible to do something on a 400-year timeline.
Yeah, I mean, that's a different issue, right? Is like, okay, well, in 400 years, all the characters are going to be dead anyway, so it's basically going to be a different story. Now, that doesn't really matter that much to me in Three Body Problem because I couldn't have cared less about any of the characters, which is a different third problem that I had with that book. But in this case, it was just simply the book ends with like, you gotta be scared because the aliens, and I don't know, I think we'll manage. Which of course is not what happens because it's not my book, I didn't write it, the author did, and so he writes the aliens showing up and completely dominating because he can just decide to do that, it's his book. But I don't believe him. See?
I mean, there is very few things that can't be solved in 400 years.
You can say whatever you want in the story. The question is, will your reader believe you?
Even if something is supposed to be technically impossible, I just think in 400 years, you're like, we'll figure it out. Or like, it's not my problem right now because it's too far away.
Right, it's like so far into the future, it just doesn't feel like a real problem. I'm not a, oh gosh, what do they call themselves? The Sam Bankman-Fried people. I'm not an effective altruist, okay? I care about people who are alive today.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure effective altruism is just an excuse to do whatever they want. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure out there is some effective altruist who really means well and is doing some good work, but I think for most of them, let's talk about too much urgency, because that happens.
Well, we can't because the episode's going to end pretty soon here.
Oh no! It's almost like we don't have time to like have a conversation to sit down and talk about things for a while.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you give me the inverse of the 400-year problem is if you tell me, like, well, you have to build a car and you have an hour and you have to build it from scratch. It's like, well, that's just not possible. I'm sorry.
We talked about it being unrealistic, but there's also the issue of, are the protagonists using their time effectively and are we getting frustrated with them? Like, a study in drowning. We talked about the scene in Studying of Drowning, which there's a big storm that's about to hit, and the lovebirds of the story have been hanging out in this creepy mansion that's falling apart, and there's a good chance the storm will completely demolish the mansion, and they have their like research materials in there, so they really need to just grab their research materials and get out. Instead, bow chicka wow wow.
Yeah, they gotta go have sexy time instead.
Sexy times. It's like, no, this situation is too urgent for you to have a slow scene where you have sex and then fall asleep together. That's frustrating. And this again happens where you want your characters to have a little downtime. You want them to have some like relationship time, but you've created a problem that is too urgent. And so realistically, they should not be doing that. Generally, in this case, you just want to create some kind of waiting step for them. We're like, sorry, we can't do anything until such and such calls us back. Or the storm in this case can already have hit and now they're stuck in the house, just the two of them, and it's perfect time for them to,
You gotta create the flow of time in such a way that it doesn't feel like they should be doing something other than what you want them to do right now.
Or another thing that can happen that is an interesting challenge is when you have a story that takes place over a long time period. And we had, I think, a recent podcast episode on this, where for that one you need to do we set a deadline that's really far away, and now we're gonna summarize all the time passing really fast. So now that event that was far away is suddenly really close, and now it's urgent. And then event is over, you do your falling action scenes, and then fast forward again.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I don't like when stories just summarize huge swaths of time like that. I find it disorienting. It takes me out of the story. It makes me less likely to care about it. I'm constantly wondering, okay, a year has passed. Are these characters the same? Or did they change in that year? I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Other people don't seem to have a problem with it.
Got a grumpy magic school hater here.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, at least a magic school usually only fast forwards a couple months at a time. It'd be weird to fast forward through an entire school year, although Babel did that.
Yeah, Babel's not really an example that people should follow.
Babel has so many other problems that it's really hard to disentangle the passage of time issue.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think with that, our urgency has run out, and now we will have to call this episode to a close.
Since our time is running low, listeners, you have only minutes to support us on Patreon before this podcast self-destructs.
Kaboom.
Do you feel motivated now? Feeling the tension? Just go to patreon.com/mythcreants before it's too late.
Bum, bum, bum. And before we go, I want to thank a couple of our existing patrons. First, there's Amon Jabber. He's an urban fantasy writer and a connoisseur of Marvel. And then there's Kathy Ferguson, who's a professor of political theory and Star Trek. We will talk to you next week.
There was a dragon with a pointy tail. He was bigger than a whale and his breath was terrible. He scared the princess when he came around. Tried to burn the castle down, but she caught him by his tail. Then she tied him to a tree so the dragon couldn't fly. She told him he was mean and it made the dragon cry. When he finally apologized, she offered him some tea. He accepted it graciously. Now he visits every weekend with the princess who saved herself.
This has been the Mythcreant Podcast. Opening closing theme, The Princess Who Saved Herself by Jonathan Colton.